what he's referring to are these two things, the radial and the tangential. And the tangential is going out, and the radial is going in. And when you're going up and in at the same time, you get a three-dimensional cone. It rises and converges at the same time. So there's an expansiveness, which is the rising, and there's convergence. And the rising is in space, and the convergence is in time, and so it's represented by this cone. So fractals allow you to have a space that holds these opposing forces. Individuality or uniqueness and identity of the element within a dimensional set. So these are happening at the same time. It's hard to visualize, but at each stage, you've got a whole. And you are that whole. And you're also an image of the entire whole. And then you can split yourself up into lots of pieces. And so then you're just one of many. And each one of those one of many is reflecting you and the whole, and each one of those can be split up into many. So it's these two things. You're at once part of a category, and you are unique as a whole. And it's this duality of being particular and part of community at the same time that creates this dynamic interplay. Sartre, I think, would call this the nothingness that's coiled up inside being. Teilhard would say it's the spirit inside matter. It's basically, and New Age sciences would call it the complexity at the edge of chaos that's far from the homeostatic equilibrium, where the opposing forces of external and internal merge into a spirally convergent directionality. So entropy rises with complexity, while the energy remains constant. Space acceleratingly expands, time acceleratingly implodes, and at the end, at the omega point, you get a simultaneous infinite entropy and infinite order simultaneously. And that would theoretically be the end of time. No, I'm not going to get eschatological because that would be beyond the realm of science. Okay.
Unlike the rest of the presentation.
Okay, so really quickly, an existential analysis from the perspective of the self yields a fundamental relation of conflict and competition. If you were to extend the scope of the self to greater and greater fractally self-similar whole, if you were to see that every part is the same as the whole, then there would be no reason to differentiate between you and the other. You would end up getting a benefit of communion and cooperation overriding internal level competition and internal level antagonism. So competition exists among elements until they're synthesized into a higher dimensional organic whole. They compete until a threshold is reached, like a four-dimensional threshold, or three-dimensional, or two-dimensional, as it's going on. And at that point, when they go through this threshold, they reach a point of where cooperation becomes more beneficial. So if this is us moving along and getting closer and closer and closer and closer, sometimes this is called the eye of God, because phi is the most irrational of all irrational numbers. You can create it with just the number 1. It's 1 plus 1 divided by 1 plus 1 divided by 1 plus 1 forever, or 1 plus the square root of 1 plus the square root of 1 plus the square root of 1 forever. So you don't need any other numbers but 1 in order to get this self-similar image. So eventually, at the end, well, Teilhard's really concerned about seeing. He's like, how do people see the world? And the result, the omega point, would be that we'd be seeing the world with the eyes of God. And as such, everything would be connected, and we'd feel compassion and responsibility for all the elements instead of just ourselves. So I want to finish with a quote. Well, one quote, a very short quote, which kind of sums up what I just said. Let's see what else. Okay. This is Mary Louise von Franz from Number and Time. She says, by definition, the greater cosmic unity cannot be subdivided into a plurality of quantities. It can only reveal itself in the course of time, always as the same whole, in various qualitative aspects, or as Manfred Horker translates it, rhythmical phases of transformation, which are circumstantial, literally translated as by that which stands around. So every one of these phase changes is just a process of becoming more and more embedded and surrounded by the same whole with new qualitative aspects. And the last quote here is from Eamon Healy, who's a biochemist, and he was filmed for this movie, Waking Life. And it's really cool. He gives a really good impression of what Teilhard's talking about about a hominizing universe and centrating on the person. So, he says, what we're looking at here are three strands: biological, anthropological, the development of cities, and culture, which is human expression. What you've seen here is the evolution of populations and not the evolution of individuals. If you look at the time scales that are involved here, 2 billion for life, 6 million for the hominid, 100,000 for mankind, you see this telescoping nature of evolution. And when you get to agriculture, when you get to the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution, you're talking 10,000 years, 400 years, 150 years, it's further telescoping. And so as we go through the new evolution, it's going to telescope to the point where we should be able to manifest it within our lifetime, within a generation. Before, in the old evolutionary paradigm, one would die and the other would grow and dominate. But under the new paradigm, there would exist a mutually supportive, non-competitive grouping, independent from the external. What's interesting here is that the evolution now becomes an individually centered process emanating from the needs and desires of the individual, and not an external process or passive process where the individual is just at the whim of the collective. So you produce a neo-human with a new individuality and a new consciousness, but that's only the beginning of the evolutionary cycle. Because as this next cycle proceeds, the input is now this new intelligence. As intelligence piles on intelligence and ability piles on ability, the speed changes until you reach some kind of crescendo. In a way, it could almost be imagined as an instantaneous fulfillment of human and neo-human potential. That would be like the technological singularity. It could be totally different. It could be the amplification of the individual, the multiplication of individual existences, parallel existences, now with the individual no longer restricted by time and space. And the manifestations of this neo-human type evolution could be dramatically counterintuitive. The old evolution is cold, sterile, efficient. Its manifestations are those of social adaptation. We're talking about parasitism, dominance, morality, war, predation. These would be subject to de-emphasis and de-evolution. The new evolutionary paradigm will give us the human traits of truth, loyalty, justice, freedom. These will be the manifestations of the new evolution. That is what we would hope to see. Yes, that would be nice.